I am Walter Hensley, 58 years old, and 3 days ago my daughter-in-law's own mother called me by mistake and left a voicemail that ended my family as I knew it. I was halfway through mowing the back lawn when my phone buzzed in my shirt pocket. I did not recognize I had a voicemail until I sat down with a glass of iced tea an hour later, and by the time I finished listening to it twice, my hands would not stop shaking. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments what state you are watching from tonight. And if you have ever trusted the wrong person with your whole heart, hit that like button because you already know exactly how this feels. I grew up outside Pittsburgh, the son of a steel worker who taught me that a man's word is the only currency that never loses its value. I spent 32 years as a commercial pilot, first for a regional carrier and then for one of the majors, flying long-haul routes that kept me away from home for stretches at a time. My wife Carol passed away 6 years ago from ovarian cancer, and after she was gone, the only thing that gave my life shape was our son Derek. He is 38 now, and to anyone who met him at a backyard barbecue, he seemed like a devoted husband and a mid-level operations manager at a logistics company, quietly building a life with his wife, Ashley. That Thursday had started like any other. I had flown in from a layover in Denver the night before and spent the morning doing the ordinary things a retired adjacent man does: coffee on the porch, the crossword, a trip to the hardware store for weather stripping I never got around to installing. Derek and Ashley had been staying with me for what they called a temporary transition, while they looked for a new house closer to his office. It had already stretched to 4 months. I did not mind. I told myself it was nice having noise in the house again after so many silent years. I was out back with the mower when my cell phone rang inside my pocket, muffled under the engine noise. I did not even feel it vibrate. It was only later, sitting on the porch with sweat cooling on the back of my neck, that I saw the missed call and the voicemail icon. The number was unfamiliar, a local area code but not one I recognized. I pressed play, expecting a robocall about my car's extended warranty. Instead, I heard a woman's voice, sharp and rushed, clearly meant for someone else entirely. "Ashley, honey, it's Mom. Listen, I talked to the lawyer again this morning, and he says once Walter signs the medical directive naming Derek as his healthcare proxy, that's basically the last piece. After that, getting him declared can proceed even faster than we thought, especially if the doctor Derek found is willing to say his memory issues are progressing. Once that's done, the house transfer goes through without him being able to contest a thing. Call me back before you two head over there tonight. We need to go over exactly what you're going to say to him at dinner." The message ended. I sat there in the fading evening light with the phone still pressed to my ear, long after the voice had stopped, listening to nothing but static and the sound of my own heartbeat. I do not have memory issues. I have never had memory issues. I am the man who flew a Boeing 767 across the Atlantic Ocean 400 times without a single incident report, who still does the New York Times crossword in ink, who balances my own checkbook by hand out of habit. Someone somewhere was building a paper trail to make the world believe otherwise. I sat very still on that porch, and I want you to understand something about me before I tell you what happened next. I did not raise my voice. I did not storm inside and confront my son the moment he pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later. 32 years in a cockpit teaches you something that no other profession quite does. When the warning lights start flashing, the worst thing you can do is panic and yank the controls. You run the checklist. You stabilize. You figure out exactly what is wrong before you decide how to respond, because a wrong move made in fear can be far more dangerous than the original problem. So I did the only thing that made sense to a man trained to handle emergencies calmly. I saved the voicemail to a separate file on my phone, backed it up to my email, and then I erased any evidence from my expression that anything at all was wrong. When Derek and Ashley walked through the front door that evening carrying a bag of takeout and a bottle of wine, I greeted them exactly the way I always did. "There he is," Derek said, setting the bag down on the kitchen counter. "How was your day, Dad?" "Quiet," I said. "Mowed the lawn, did some errands, nothing exciting." I smiled at him the way I had smiled at him 1,000 times before, and it did not cost me anything to do it, because I have spent decades learning how to keep my face perfectly level while instruments in front of me tell me the plane is descending too fast. Ashley set the table with a warmth that, looking back now, I understand was entirely rehearsed. She asked me how my knee was doing, whether I had been keeping up with my blood pressure medication, whether I had been sleeping through the night. At the time, I thought she was simply a caring daughter-in-law. Now I understood she was gathering material, building a case, quietly documenting anything she could twist into a symptom. Over dinner, Derek brought up something that should have seemed innocent on any other night. "Hey, Dad, listen. I know this is kind of a weird thing to bring up, but Ashley and I were talking, and with you getting older and living alone in this big house, we think it might be smart to get some of the paperwork in order. You know, just in case. A healthcare directive, power of attorney, that kind of thing. Just so if anything ever happens, we're not scrambling." I looked at my son across the dinner table. The boy I had taught to ride a bike in this very driveway, the boy I had carried on my shoulders at the air show when he was 6 years old, and told me that day he wanted to be a pilot just like me. I looked at him and I felt something crack quietly inside my chest. The exact sound a support beam makes right before it gives way, except it does not collapse all at once. It just groans. And you know. "That sounds sensible," I told him. "Let me think about it." "No rush, right?" "No rush at all," Ashley said quickly, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "We just love you and want to make sure you're taken care of." I finished my dinner. I complimented the pasta. I went to bed that night in my own house and lay awake until nearly 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, replaying every strange comment Ashley had made over the past 4 months. Every time Derek had mentioned my forgetfulness a little too loudly in front of guests. Every time they had insisted on driving me to appointments, I was perfectly capable of driving myself too. It had all seemed like love. Now I understood it was reconnaissance. You should know something about me before I continue. During my career, I did more than fly airplanes. 2 decades ago, I invested a modest inheritance from my father into a small avionics parts supplier in Ohio, back when it was struggling and nearly worthless. I did it quietly, almost as a hobby, something to think about on long layovers between flights. That company was eventually bought out by a major aerospace contractor 12 years later, and the shares I held converted into a settlement that most people would need several lifetimes to earn through a paycheck. I never touched most of it. It sat, compounding quietly in a trust that only my longtime financial advisor and I knew the full details of. To the outside world, to my own son, I was a retired airline pilot living comfortably but modestly on a pension and some savings. I drove a 12-year-old pickup truck. I clipped coupons out of habit, not necessity. Carol and I made that choice together decades ago because we had watched what unearned wealth did to the children of some of our friends, and we swore we would never let it hollow out our own son. The tragic irony of that decision sat in my stomach like a stone that night. I had spent years hiding a fortune to protect Derek from becoming exactly the kind of person who would try to steal one. The next morning, I called my financial advisor of 18 years, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Alvarez, on a line I knew was secure. I told her everything. The voicemail, the healthcare directive, the Dr. Derek had apparently already found who was willing to sign off on cognitive decline I did not have. Patricia went quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. "Walter," she finally said, "this isn't just a family disagreement. What you're describing is the early stages of a guardianship fraud scheme. If they get a compliant doctor to declare you incapacitated, and you've already signed paperwork naming Derek as your healthcare proxy, they could petition a court to take control of your assets entirely. And once a judge signs off on that, contesting it from the inside becomes brutally difficult, especially for someone who's supposedly not of sound mind anymore." "I am not signing anything," I said. "Good," she said. "But Walter, you need to be very careful. People who are willing to fake a diagnosis to steal from a parent are not going to stop just because you say no. You need documentation, and you need it now, before they can claim you're being erratic or paranoid." That afternoon, while Derek was at work and Ashley had gone out to what she called a doctor's appointment, I did something I had never once considered doing in my own home. I called a security company recommended by a fellow retired pilot, a man who had gone through something similar with a business partner years earlier. Within 4 hours, a technician had installed a discreet, hardwired camera system throughout the first floor of my house, including audio capture in the kitchen and living room, all of it recording to an encrypted cloud server that neither Derek nor Ashley would ever think to look for. I told the technician I simply wanted peace of mind after some recent break-ins in the neighborhood. He never asked another question. As a pilot, I had spent my career trusting instruments over instinct when the two disagreed, and every instrument in my life was now screaming that something dangerous was unfolding under my own roof. For the next several days, I played the role I had been unknowingly cast in for months. The tired, aging widower, slightly forgetful, endlessly grateful for his son's attentiveness. I let Derek walk me through simplifying my finances, watching carefully as he asked pointed questions about which accounts I held and where, questions I answered vaguely, deflecting with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 3 decades reading instrument panels and giving nothing away to air traffic control during an emergency. Then, 6 days after the voicemail, everything accelerated. I came home from a walk to find a car in the driveway I did not recognize, a sedan with a rental company sticker still on the bumper. Through the front window, I could see Derek and Ashley in the living room with a man in a gray suit I had never met. Papers spread across my coffee table. I stood on the porch for a moment, my heart hammering, and then I did exactly what I had trained myself to do. I did not walk in. I pulled out my phone, opened the security app, and watched the feed instead, listening through the audio pickup embedded in the smoke detector above the fireplace. "He's not going to fight it," the man in the gray suit was saying. I recognized the voice from a photograph Patricia had sent me 2 days earlier, after her own quiet inquiries. His name was Gerald Voss, and he was not, as he had told Derek, an elder care consultant. He was a disbarred former attorney who had built a small, quiet business, specifically helping families push aging relatives into guardianships they had never agreed to, always for a substantial fee taken as a percentage of the estate once control was secured. Once Dr. Whitfield signs off on the cognitive evaluation, Voss continued, "And given what you two have told me about the confusion, the repetitive stories, the missed appointments, that shouldn't be difficult. We file the petition. The house alone is worth what, 700,000? And you mentioned he's got some kind of retirement account and old company stock. Once the court appoints Derek as guardian, all of that becomes his to manage. Nobody has to know he was never actually confused in the first place because on paper he will be. He trusts me completely," Derek said, and I felt the floor tilt beneath me even though I was standing perfectly still on solid ground. "He'll sign whatever I put in front of him. He always has." Ashley's voice cut in, tight with impatience. "How fast can this actually move? Because the sooner this is finalized, the sooner we can list the house. We already have a broker lined up who's ready to move the second the guardianship clears. We are drowning in Derek's business debt, Gerald. We need this done before the bank starts asking harder questions." I stood on my own porch, listening to my son discuss stealing my life out from under me with the same casual tone he might use to discuss a home renovation. I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as the sound of an engine failing at 30,000 feet, that split second of silence before every alarm in the cockpit starts screaming at once. I did not walk inside. I turned around, walked calmly back to my truck, and drove 3 blocks away before I pulled over and allowed myself exactly 60 seconds to feel like a father whose heart had just been torn out of his chest. I thought about teaching Derek to fly a Cessna when he turned 16, white-knuckled and proud, both of us laughing when he bounced the landing. I thought about Carol on her deathbed, gripping my hand and telling me to take care of our boy. I let the grief move through me completely. And then, just as it had 1,000 times in a cockpit during an actual emergency, the panic passed and the training took over. I was not going to be a helpless old man drowning in his own living room. I was going to be exactly what I had trained to be my entire career. A man who does not lose control of the aircraft, no matter how bad the failure looks on the instruments. I drove to a small extended stay hotel 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of place that takes cash and asks no questions, and checked in under circumstances that would not ping any account Derek might have access to. I sat down at the small desk in that room and opened my laptop. And for the first time since Carol died, I felt the cold, focused clarity that used to settle over me the moment an emergency checklist began. They believed I was a modestly comfortable retired pilot with a house and a pension. They had no idea I controlled a trust worth just under $40 million, built quietly over 2 decades, and shielded from prying eyes precisely so that no one, not even my own son, would ever see me as a target. They also had no idea that 32 years of flying commercial aircraft had trained me to handle exactly this kind of crisis. Identify the failure, isolate it, and execute the correct procedure without emotion clouding the response. I called my daughter-in-law's mother first, the woman whose voicemail had started all of this. Her name was Susan Marsh, and she answered on the second ring, her voice bright and unsuspecting. "Susan, it's Walter Hensley," I said. "I think you meant to call your daughter the other day. You reached me instead." The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. I did not scream at her. I simply told her, calmly, that I had the recording, that I understood the plan involving Gerald Voss and Dr. Whitfield, and that I would be speaking with law enforcement very soon. Susan began crying almost immediately, insisting she had only gone along with it because Ashley told her I truly was declining, that she never would have participated if she had known the truth. I believed her, mostly, though it did not change what she had helped set in motion. I told her that if she wanted any chance of staying out of this mess, she would tell me everything she knew and stop speaking to her daughter about it entirely. She agreed instantly. From Susan, I learned the full shape of it. Derek's logistics company had quietly laid him off 8 months earlier after a warehouse contract collapsed, something he had never told me, choosing instead to let me believe he was simply between opportunities while secretly draining savings and running up credit cards to maintain appearances. Ashley had been pressuring him for over a year to find a way to access what she assumed was a substantial but modest inheritance sitting in my name, certain that faking a diagnosis would be easier and faster than waiting for me to die naturally. Dr. Whitfield, it turned out, was not even a neurologist. He was a general practitioner 2 years from losing his license over a prescription fraud investigation, willing to sign whatever documentation kept him financially afloat in the meantime. That evening, from the hotel room, I did something I had never imagined myself capable of. I opened my banking portal and quietly began dismantling the financial safety net I had unknowingly been providing Derek and Ashley for years. I had been co-signed on their mortgage application, a fact they thought I had forgotten about, and I contacted the lender directly to formally withdraw that co-signature, triggering a mandatory review of their loan terms. I had also, without either of them realizing it, been the guarantor on Derek's business line of credit from years earlier, the one that had funded his failed logistics side venture. I revoked the guarantee entirely. Within hours, automated notices would begin reaching them, informing them that the financial scaffolding propping up their entire lifestyle was quietly being removed, one support beam at a time. I called Derek's phone the next morning at exactly 9 o'clock. He answered, sounding slightly out of breath. "Dad, hey, everything okay? You didn't come home last night. We were getting worried." "Everything is fine, son," I said, letting warmth flood into my voice. The same calm reassurance I once used to talk a panicked first-time flyer through turbulence. I decided to take an impromptu trip up to the lake house. Clear my head a little. I should have called. I'm sorry. "Oh," he said, and I could hear the relief loosen something in his chest through the phone. "No, that's great, Dad. You deserve a break. How long are you thinking of staying up there?" "Through the weekend, probably," I said. "Cell service is spotty up here, so don't worry if you can't reach me for a day or two." "Take all the time you need," Derek said. And in the background, I heard him cover the receiver and whisper something to Ashley, something I could not quite make out but did not need to, because I already knew exactly what it meant. It meant the runway was clear. It meant they believed they had a few days to finish building the case against a man who was not even at the address they assumed. I ended the call and sat in the silence of that hotel room, feeling the full weight of what I now understood about my own son. He was not calling out of love. He was calling to confirm the trap was still set correctly. Over the following 2 days, I watched through the hidden cameras as Ashley made call after call, coordinating with Dr. Whitfield's office to move up the evaluation appointment, coordinating with a real estate agent about listing timelines contingent on legal clearance, coordinating with Gerald Voss about filing paperwork with the county court. I watched Derek sit at my kitchen table, in my house, going through old photographs and paperwork from my desk, searching, I later learned, for anything that might support a narrative of confusion or decline, misplaced bills, old appointment reminders, anything he could hand to a judge as evidence. I also watched something that broke whatever small piece of my heart Carol had left intact when she passed. Derek found her wedding ring, the one I still kept in a small wooden box on my dresser, because I had never been able to bring myself to do anything else with it. I watched him hold it up to the light, turn it over in his fingers, and say to Ashley, half to himself, "This alone's probably worth $8,000. We should get it appraised before we put the house on the market. Make sure nothing valuable just walks out the door during a move." He set it in his jacket pocket like it was nothing more than a coin he had found on the sidewalk. I sat in that hotel room and I did not cry. The grieving father in me had already had his 60 seconds on the side of the road 3 days earlier. What remained was something colder, something that had spent 3 decades being trained to respond to catastrophic failure with precision instead of panic. I called my longtime attorney, a sharp, formidable man named Richard Okafor, who had handled my estate planning for nearly 15 years, and who, I now realized, was about to become the most important ally I had. I told him everything, laid it out exactly the way I would have delivered an emergency briefing to air traffic control. Clear, sequenced, devoid of unnecessary emotion, but leaving nothing out. "Walter," Richard said, once I had finished, "this isn't a family dispute anymore. Attempting to falsify a medical evaluation to secure guardianship over a competent adult is fraud. And depending on how far Voss has taken this with the court filings already, we may be looking at conspiracy charges as well. We need to bring in law enforcement, and we need to do it carefully. Because if they sense you're onto them, they'll either destroy the paper trail or accelerate the timeline before we can catch them in the act. I don't want them to just walk away from this with a warning," I told him. "I want it documented. I want it prosecuted. I want a judge and a jury to see exactly what my son was willing to do to me." Richard was quiet for a moment. "Then we let it play out a little further," he said finally. "We let them file the guardianship petition. The moment that document is submitted to the court with a fraudulent medical evaluation attached, the crime is completed in the eyes of the law, not just attempted. That's when we move." 2 days later, Richard called to tell me that Dr. Whitfield's office had submitted the cognitive evaluation to the county court and that Gerald Voss had filed the emergency guardianship petition that same afternoon, requesting immediate temporary authority over my finances and healthcare decisions pending a hearing. Richard had already reached out quietly to a contact in the district attorney's elder fraud unit, a division that existed, I learned, specifically because cases like mine were disturbingly common. The assistant district attorney assigned to the case, a composed, sharp-eyed woman named Denise Falcone, met with Richard and me in a private conference room downtown. I brought everything, 6 days of audio and video from my own living room, Susan Marsh's phone number, and a summary of what she had told me, which Denise's office would later corroborate directly. Bank records showing the mortgage co-signature and business credit guarantee I had recently revoked, establishing a clear financial motive. And the filed guardianship petition itself, sitting in the county system with Dr. Whitfield's fraudulent evaluation attached to it like a signed confession. Denise Falcone leaned back in her chair after reviewing the footage of Voss discussing his fee structure and Derek confirming that I trusted him completely and would sign whatever he put in front of me. "Mr. Hensley," she said, "in 11 years doing this job, I have never had a victim walk in here with this level of documentation. Most families come to us after the guardianship has already been granted, after the damage is already done, and by then it's an uphill legal battle just to undo it. You caught this before it happened." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "we let the court hearing proceed as scheduled. Your son and his wife believe they're walking into a routine guardianship hearing where a judge simply rubber stamps what they've already arranged. They have no idea we'll be there with a criminal referral ready to go, and with you present to testify, in person, fully competent, contradicting every claim in that fraudulent evaluation." I asked her whether I could be the one to walk into that hearing. Not through a video call, not through a written statement read by an attorney. I wanted to walk into that courtroom myself. "That's exactly what we need," she said. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday morning. I spent the days beforehand not in the hotel room, but back in my own house, quietly, having confirmed through the cameras that Derek and Ashley believed I remained at the lake and would not be checking in on the property. I walked through the rooms of the house Carol and I had built our life in, touched the kitchen counter where Derek had once done his homework as a boy, and reminded myself exactly what I was fighting to protect. Monday morning, I put on the dark navy suit I had worn to exactly 3 funerals and 1 retirement ceremony in the past decade, the closest thing I owned to armor. Richard and Denise Falcone met me outside the county courthouse. Inside the courtroom, Derek sat beside Gerald Voss at one table, Ashley directly behind them, both dressed sharply, both wearing expressions of practiced, solemn concern, the look of a devoted son and daughter-in-law reluctantly forced to seek help for a beloved but declining father. I watched my son's face when I walked through the courtroom doors under my own power, wearing a suit, carrying myself the way I had carried myself through 32 years of high-stakes emergencies and it was as if every drop of blood drained out of him in a single second. The color simply left his face. Ashley's hand flew to her mouth. Gerald Voss's pen froze mid-signature on whatever document he had been preparing to hand the clerk. "Dad," Derek said, his voice cracking, barely above a whisper, "you're supposed to be at the lake." "I have never been to the lake, son," I said, my voice level and calm. The same tone I once used to calmly inform a cabin full of frightened passengers that we were beginning our final descent. "I have been 3 miles from this courthouse for over a week, watching everything you and Ashley have been doing in my own living room. I heard Gerald explain how easy it would be to convince a judge I was declining. I heard Ashley tell her mother you two were drowning in debt and needed the house sold immediately. I watched you take your mother's wedding ring out of her jewelry box and put a dollar figure on it before she was even declared incompetent." The judge, an older woman with sharp, unreadable eyes, looked between us with growing understanding as Denise Falcone rose and formally introduced herself, requesting the court's attention for a matter that had just escalated from a civil guardianship petition to a criminal one. I will not draw out every detail of what followed in that courtroom, only tell you that the footage was played, that Dr. Whitfield's fraudulent evaluation was formally entered as evidence of falsified medical documentation, and that Gerald Voss, upon realizing the scope of what had just been placed on the record, requested legal counsel before saying another word. The guardianship petition was denied within minutes. The criminal referral was accepted before the hearing even adjourned. Derek turned to me one final time as bailiffs approached to formally document the proceedings, his eyes filled with a desperation I had not seen since he was a small boy, afraid of the dark. "Dad, please. You don't understand what kind of pressure I was under. I was drowning. I didn't know what else to do. I'm your son." I looked at the man who used to fall asleep on my chest during turbulence when he was 4 years old, certain nothing in the world could hurt him as long as I was there. I felt the same cold clarity I had felt every time an instrument panel lit up red at 35,000 feet, the total absence of panic that comes only after you have already made your decision. "You are still my son," I told him, and my voice did not waver even slightly. "But you were willing to have a doctor declare me mentally incompetent, take control of everything I own, and put your own mother's wedding ring in your pocket like loose change. I do not know that man. I have never known that man." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. 32 years of commanding a cockpit teaches you that true authority has never once required volume. Derek was not arrested in handcuffs that day, dragged out in front of cameras the way you might imagine from a movie. The reality of elder fraud prosecution is quieter and, in its own way, far more devastating. Over the following weeks, formal charges were filed against Derek, Ashley, Gerald Voss, and Dr. Whitfield for conspiracy to commit fraud and the falsification of medical records. Susan Marsh, having cooperated fully and provided testimony corroborating the timeline, avoided charges entirely but lost her relationship with her daughter almost immediately, Ashley never speaking to her again after learning what she had disclosed. Dr. Whitfield's medical license, already under review, was revoked outright, and he was later sentenced to 18 months for his role in the fraudulent evaluation, one of several such schemes investigators discovered he had assisted with over the years once they began digging. Gerald Voss, it turned out, had built an entire quiet business around exactly this kind of scheme, and my case became the thread that unraveled at least 4 other families' worth of attempted guardianship fraud once prosecutors started pulling on it. He is currently awaiting sentencing on multiple counts. Derek and Ashley took a plea agreement rather than risk trial, given the overwhelming weight of the video and audio evidence. Derek received 3 years, with the possibility of parole after 18 months given his lack of prior record. Ashley received a shorter sentence, having played a lesser documented role, though the footage of her coordinating the sale of my house before any guardianship had even been granted weighed heavily against any claim of innocence. I did not attend the sentencing. Richard told me afterward that Derek had asked, through his attorney, whether I might consider speaking on his behalf, might consider mercy given everything we had once been to each other. I thought about it for exactly one evening, sitting alone on my back porch with a glass of scotch I had been saving for a celebration I never imagined would look like this. I thought about the wedding ring in his jacket pocket. I decided my silence was answer enough. 6 months have passed now since that morning. I sat down with a glass of iced tea and pressed play on a voicemail that was never meant to reach me. The house is quiet in a way it has not been in a very long time, but it is no longer the suffocating quiet of Carol's absence. It is something closer to peace. I want to tell you about someone else now, because this story is not only about betrayal, it is also about the person who unknowingly gave me the only warning I ever received. Susan Marsh, Ashley's mother, the woman whose misdialed voicemail exposed the entire plan, reached out to me a few months after everything settled, terrified and ashamed, certain I hated her for her part in it. However unwitting, I did not hate her. A woman who dials the wrong number by mistake is not the architect of a scheme. She is simply, in the end, the reason I survived it. Susan had spent years working as a home health aide, raising Ashley largely on her own after her husband left, never once accumulating enough savings to retire the way she had hoped. When I learned this, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called my attorney and quietly established a modest but meaningful trust in Susan's name, enough to let her retire comfortably, enough to tell her that a mistake made honestly and corrected honestly will always matter more to me than an intentional betrayal wrapped in years of practiced love. She wept on the phone when Richard delivered the paperwork, insisting she had done nothing to deserve it. I told her that loyalty and honesty, even accidental honesty, are worth more than blood ever guaranteed anyone. I sit on my back porch most evenings now, in the same chair Carol used to sit in beside me, watching the sun go down over a lawn I still mow myself. My son is somewhere behind concrete walls, learning to live with the consequences of a choice he made freely, with no gun to his head, no true desperation forcing his hand, only greed and impatience dressed up as necessity. I do not know if I will ever speak to him again. I do not know if I want to. What I know is this: 32 years in a cockpit taught me that the most dangerous moment in any emergency is not the failure itself. It is the instinct to freeze, to hope the problem resolves on its own if you simply wait long enough and love hard enough. It never does. A warning light exists to be acted upon, not explained away because acting on it feels too painful to bear. I loved my son completely, and I still do somewhere underneath everything that happened, but love was never going to stop him from doing what he did, and love alone was never going to be enough to save me from it. Only clear eyes and a steady hand ever accomplish that. If you are watching this and some part of you recognizes a warning light flashing somewhere in your own family that you have been too afraid to look at directly, I hope you find the courage to look anyway. Tell me in the comments, would you have had the strength to walk into that courtroom the way I did? And if this story meant something to you tonight, stay with me, because there are more stories like this one still to come.